A very good afternoon to one and all. On behalf of Department of Pediatrics, King George Medical University, I, Dr. Arpita, welcome you all to the ninth lecture in the series of Georgian Pediatrics Department Trust Alma Mater lecture series. Um, so, without wasting much of your time, I would like to welcome our noted alumni for today and a dear junior, Dr. Tarishi Nimani. After doing post graduation from our department, she went on to do fellowship in pediatric neurology, Mumbai, and then she gained Bill Marshall Fellowship from London, UK. And thereafter, she did Epilepsy and Neurophysiology Fellowship from Cleveland Clinic, USA. She is currently an associate consultant and pediatric neurologist in Narayan Hridayalaya, Bangalore, and her area of expertise lies in pediatric epilepsy, epilepsy surgery, autism, behavioral problems, cerebral palsy, CNS infection movement disorders, and other neurogenetic disorders. I welcome you, Tarishi, and over to you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I would really like to thank Professor Shelly, ma'am, and Arpita, ma'am, for giving me this opportunity. It brings back so much memories, and it's an honor to be actually presenting a talk in front of your teachers and mentors from whom I've learned. So, without wasting time, let us start with today's topic. Let me share my screen.
Yeah.
Can you see it?
Not yet, Tarishi.
One second. I'm actually not able to see my window for presentation.
Okay.
One second.
The same arrow sign, you have to just present, you have to just click on the present now.
One second. Now can you see it?
Just try opening the PPT first and then
Okay.
try sharing. Yeah.
So entire screen if I share, right?
Window.
Sorry. Yeah. So
Yeah.
we'll be talking about case-based approach of pediatric demyelinating disorders. We'll go through introduction, classification, and then different cases for ADEM, NMO, MOG, and MS. So before starting, I would like to explain that we should know the difference between demyelination, dysmyelination, hypermyelination, and delayed myelination to understand acquired demyelination disorders. So anything where the myelin is completely formed normally and it is damaged due to immune mediated injury or infections or drugs or toxic agents, there is damage after formation of normal myelin that is known as demyelination. However, dysmyelination is when the myelin which is formed is structurally or functionally abnormal, which happens because of some which happens in genetic and inherited diseases because of mutations in the proteins and the lipids responsible for myelin synthesis and degradation. Whereas hypomyelination is reduction in the amount of myelin which is formed, which leads to generally diseases like Pelizaeus-Merzbacher, where you have delayed development in kids. And delayed myelination again is when the myelination is not matured enough, which is not age appropriate, which we see in the MRI imaging. And again, the child usually presents with delayed developmental milestones. So, amongst the demyelinating disorders, the cause can be inflammatory or immune disorders, where we have this acquired demyelinating disorders like MS, NMO, ADEM, and paraneoplastic encephalomyelitis. Even we should consider SLE and Sjogren's disease. Infectious etiologies such as HIV, HDLV1, neurosyphilis, granulomatous diseases, they're rare, but neurosarcoidosis should be kept in mind. Other toxic and metabolic disorders which can lead to a demyelinating picture, clinical as well as MRI picture. And some of them are actually common, like press, carbon monoxide toxicity, and even B12 deficiency. So these are the differentials which we should actually keep in mind when we are looking at the clinical and the MRI pictures of a patient presenting like an immune mediated demyelinating disorder. But today we'll be focusing on this group mainly. The common signs and symptoms of demyelination are cerebral, if there is cerebral cortical involvement, the patient presents with fever, seizures, encephalopathy, cognitive impairment. Optic nerve involvement leads to unilateral or bilateral vision loss. Involvement of the brainstem will lead to your cranial nerve palsies, ptosis, diplopia, vertigo. There can be motor and sensory involvement because of your cortical spinal tracts involvement, leading to weakness, hemimonoparesis, or paresthesia, pain and numbness. Cerebellar involvement leads to ataxia, nystagmus. Sometimes there can also be inflammation related meningeal involvement. And because of the spinal involvements, we can have bladder and bowel involvement, leading to incontinence and frequency urgency. So, acquired demyelinating disorders, they are mostly due to immune mediated attack, which is due to a prior infection, which leads to molecular mimicry, leading to immune response in the body, inflammation, which causes damage to the myelin sheath. They are characterized by the localization of the neurological deficit, presence or absence of encephalopathy, and the disease course. So, we have what are the types of the demyelinating acquired disorders which we have: clinically isolated syndrome, ADEM, NMO spectrum disorders, and pediatric multiple sclerosis. So, let us start with case one. This is a 4-year-old child who came to us with fever, mild to moderate grade since 2 days, followed by multiple episodes of generalized tonic-clonic seizures and altered sensorium. On examination, the child was irritable, altered behavior. He was not able to recognize his parents. GCS was 10 by 15. Meningeal signs were absent, and he had upper motor neuron signs. On investigations, blood investigations were just slightly raised TLC, rest was normal. CSF showed mild pleocytosis, which was mainly lymphocytic predominant with raised protein. Viral markers HSV, enterovirus, CHAP-B was negative. Fundus was normal. So, with this history and examination, we have a child presenting with acute febrile encephalopathy with multiple seizures. So, I would think first of acute encephalitis, which could be infective, viral, even bacterial. But we do not have meningeal signs, so pyogenic meningitis would be less. Then ADEM, autoimmune encephalitis in view of refractory seizures, but it will depend upon how the child progresses further. So, keeping this in mind, the next step was to do an MRI scan. So, as we see in this MRI scan, if we can make out through the arrows, we see large asymmetrical white matter hyperintense lesion. These are FLAIR and T2 images. This is axial and coronal cut of the brain. And we see multiple lesions involving the subcortical white matter. Subcortical is just below the gray matter. The area of the white matter is known as the subcortical white matter. And all these lesions are hyperintense, asymmetrical, and hazy. So, according to the International Pediatric MS Society group, the criteria to call clinically isolated syndrome or pediatric ADEM, for clinically isolated syndrome, there should be a CNS event with presumed inflammatory cause. There should not be any previous history of any demyelinating event. The child should not have encephalopathy except which can be explained by fever, and the MRI criteria for MS should not be met. We will be discussing the MRI criteria for MS later. However, so here in our child, there was encephalopathy. So he does not actually fit into the criteria of clinically isolated syndrome. For pediatric ADEM, there should be a polyfocal event of presumed inflammatory cause, encephalopathy, which is out of proportion that can be explained by fever. No new clinical or MRI findings 3 months after the onset. This is very important because then we have to think of some chronic demyelinating disorders. And MRI should be diffuse, poorly demarcated, large lesions predominantly involving the cerebral white matter. This actually, all these points are required for pediatric ADEM, and as we can see, it does fit in our case. So this child was diagnosed as ADEM, treated with IV methylprednisolone 30 milligrams per kg per day for 4 to 8 hours, over 4 to 8 hours for 3 days, followed by tapering of oral steroids over 4 to 6 weeks. He recovered completely in a week's time, and the repeat MRI brain at 3 months was normal. So, just as a revision to remember and to see the classical picture of ADEM MRI, we have large, fluffy, asymmetrical, hyperintense subcortical lesions. ADEM can also involve deep gray matter, that is the thalamus and the basal ganglia. So, this should be kept in mind. And mostly in acute necrotizing encephalitis, we do see the involvement of the deep gray matter. This is another picture just to remember the MRI scan in the patient of ADEM. So treatment wise, as we discussed, IV methylprednisolone for the acute treatment. If there is good response, the child is given oral prednisolone for 4 to 6 weeks. If there is no response, we can escalate the treatment to IVIG or plasma exchange, whatever is available. 50 to 80% of patients with ADEM, they will show full recovery in the next 1 to 6 months. 20% may have mortality, and this was a data where at the times when there was improper diagnosis and treatment. At present, more and more cases are early recognized and treated. 10% of the cases may progress to multiphasic ADEM, and 10% we should keep in mind can develop MS later on. So this is important to know and even counsel the parents when they come with when the child is diagnosed with the first episode of ADEM. Normally, we do not see any sequelae, but depending upon the severity of the MRI involvement and the clinical presentation, there may be mild neurocognitive deficits. Poor prognostic factors are low GCS at the time of presentation, severe neurological involvement, multiple extensive lesions, or a hyperacute involvement, such as an acute hemorrhagic leukoencephalitis, which usually has a fatal outcome. So, some important points to remember and think of alternate diagnosis is usually ADEM presents in the younger age group. But if you have onset below 1 year of age, history of developmental delay, consanguinity, we should also think of neurometabolic or some underlying leukodystrophy disorder, which may have flared up and presented like an acute presentation after a viral infection. If there is a gradual progression of symptoms and multisystemic involvement or unusual MRI features, then also alternative diagnosis should be thought for. The unusual MRI features are symmetrical white matter involvement, single supratentorial lesion, and lesions restricted solely to the brainstem and the basal ganglia. And some of these diagnoses which can mimic ADEM, we should think about is SLE, Behçet's, HLH. I'm not going in detail, but mostly SLE, Behçet's, HLH, they would present with a multi-systemic involvement, and we have specific test. When we have a tumefactive lesion, that means a single large lesion which is involving the white matter, looking like a space-occupying lesion. We should also look for CNS lymphomas and test for CSF cytospin levels. Acute cerebralitis, then biotin responsive basal ganglia disease. This is a very common, not very common, but we do see cases of this metabolic disorders when you have bilateral symmetrical basal ganglia involvement with a child presenting with acute regression, encephalopathy, dystonia, and seizures. So this should also come into mind, and it is very responsive to biotin, and the child improves drastically. Some autoimmune antibodies such as NMDA receptor encephalitis, GABA, glycine receptor, they can also involve the white matter. but they usually have neuropsychiatric involvement and movement disorders along with seizures and encephalopathy. And other would be neurometabolic disorders such as mitochondrial and others. So coming to the next case, which is actually a continuation of case one. After eight, the child was fine till 3 months. The scan was done; it was normal. After 8 months, the same child came to us with fever, followed by one episode of GTCS and sudden onset weakness of right upper lip and lower lip. On examination, he was encephalopathic. GCS was 9 by 15. Right upper motor neuron facial palsy with right hemiparesis and upper motor neuron signs. So, and this was the MRI scan done this time. We have a previous scan which we have all seen, and now this is 8 months later. We can see all the previous lesions have cleared off. There's no residue of previous lesion, and there's just one midbrain lesion, hyperintense anterior midbrain, which is probably involving the cortical spinal tract, giving us the right hemiparesis and the upper motor neuron type of facial palsy. And we have a hyperintense lesion in the thalamus. So with this acute febrile encephalopathy, focal deficit, and hyperintense lesion in anterior midbrain and thalamus. So what are the differentials? Are we looking at a second episode of ADEM, that is multiphasic ADEM? Is this child evolving into multiple sclerosis? Or do we have to now think of NMO spectrum disorder? How do we proceed? What investigations should be done? How do we treat? And how long to continue the steroids this time are the questions which come to mind. So, as we know, a child with a demyelinating event presenting with encephalopathy is diagnosed as ADEM. If the recurrence happens within 3 months, which is not in this case actually, it is known as monophasic ADEM. However, if it happens after 3 months, it is known as multiphasic ADEM, but the condition for that is it should be a single relapse and there should be no further ADEM or non-ADEM events. If this event was without encephalopathy, then we treat it as like a clinically isolated syndrome. And if there is recurrence after a clinically isolated syndrome, then we have to think of if there was optic neuritis or transverse myelitis as recurrent optic neuritis or transverse myelitis, we have to think of NMO spectrum disorders and multiple sclerosis. But for all these, they have to meet the criteria required for these conditions, which we will be discussing. If the child after one relapse presents with more than one relapse, then it is not known as MDEM. Then it is labeled as chronic demyelinating disorders. And these are the three conditions which we should think of. ADEM, which can progress to multiple sclerosis, if after 3 months the event is a non-ADEM demyelinating relapse, that is without encephalopathy, a clinically isolated event is there, and the new MRI lesions are actually meeting the dissemination in space criteria for MS, then it is labeled as ADEM progressing into MS. ADEM can progress to NMO spectrum disorders if the second relapse occurring after 3 months is accompanied by optic neuritis, long segment transverse myelitis, area prostrema syndrome, any two of the following three, and is meeting the MRI criteria required for NMO spectrum disorder. Or a lot of cases of ADEM or MDEM, they may actually be followed by recurrent optic neuritis if they present just with ON. So for this case or any such case, we need to ideally do simultaneously blood and CSF samples for aquaporin antibody for NMO, MOG antibodies for MOG encephalitis, and oligoclonal bands to rule out MS. Counts, we may say pleocytosis. In CSF, we may say mild increase in proteins. Usually the sugars are normal. And it is very, very important to always do an MRI brain with contrast, with spine screen and optic cuts. Even if we do not have any deficit which may involve the spine, we should always look into the spinal cord because it may be a silent lesion as well. And also optic cuts are important to look at the optic nerve lesions, which again can present silently. And when we do a VEP or the fundus examination, we may see abnormality in the optic nerve pathway. So for this child, the counts were normal. Blood and CSF, aquaporin antibody, MOG, oligoclonal bands were all negative. Opthal and VP was normal. Hence, and there was just one relapse. with no further episodes of ADEM or non-ADEM, and she was diagnosed with multiphasic ADEM. Treatment is same with IV methylprednisolone. However, we might continue oral corticosteroids this time for a little longer period. We usually start with 2 milligrams per kg per day of prednisolone, slowly over 2 weeks, bringing it down to 1 milligrams per kg per day and continuing it for the next 4 to 6 weeks, and then taper over the next 2 weeks. If the disability is severe and does not improve after IV methylprednisolone, then the next steps would be to give IVIG and plasma exchange, depending upon the affordability. So now, second case. This is a very interesting case. This is a 9-year-old girl with came with acute onset right-sided eye pain, followed by diminution of vision. She had no other complaints, no focal deficits. On examination, her rest of the neurological examination was absolutely normal. She was completely oriented with no focal deficits. Opthal examination shows right optic neuritis with VEP showing right optic nerve dysfunction. So we went for an MRI brain with spine. As we can see here, uh, the right and the left optic nerve. This is the right optic nerve, which is hyper intense. Then this is the optic chiasma again, which is hyper intense. We can see a white hyper intense plaque like region, the periventricular region, and in the superior cerebellar peduncle right side. There's also a lesion in the thalamus. And on spine screening, without any deficit, she had a upper cervical cord lesion which is extending into the posterior brainstem, mostly the posterior medulla. This area is also known as the area prostrema. So with this, CSF was done, for which aquaporin antibody was positive, and CSF oligoclonal bands was negative. She was diagnosed as neuromyelitis optica. So let us see the diagnostic criteria, which is the revised criteria of 2015. There are some core clinical features which are very specific for NMO spectrum disorders. Optic neuritis, transverse myelitis, which is usually long segment, area prostrema syndrome, which means that involvement of posterior medulla, and the patient usually presents with intractable vomiting or hiccups. This is a very characteristic which happens usually in NMO spectrum disorders only. Uh, these patients can have acute brainstem syndrome where we have cranial nerve palsies, diplopia, and dysphagia. Acute diencephalic syndrome, which is basically the involvement of thalamus and hypothalamus, and it presents usually with SIADH, hypotension, bradycardia, or excessive sleepiness, hypersomnolence, because of the involvement of the thalamus and the hypothalamus. And cerebral syndrome, in which the child may have seizures, which is rare, with non-specific CNS lesions. So we can have NMO spectrum disorder where there may be antibody positive or aquaporin antibody negative. So for aquaporin antibody positive NMO, the criteria is either one of the core clinical features with positive antibody and exclusion of alternative diagnosis, which is usually MS. Then for aquaporin antibody negative NMO, there should be two core clinical characteristics, and as a result of one clinical attack, and at least one of these two core clinical characteristics should be amongst either optic neuritis, long segment transverse myelitis, or area prostrema syndrome. So out of the first three, any one should be there, and total there should be two core clinical characteristics with dissemination in space, that is more than one area of the central nervous system should be involved, and specific MRI requirements, which we will be discussing. It should test negative for aquaporin antibody and exclusion of alternative diagnosis. For aquaporin negative NMO, we should to label it as aquaporin negative, aquaporin antibody negative NMO spectrum disorder. We have to rule out alternative diagnosis, which are MOG antibody. So MOG is a myelin oligodendrocyte glial associated encephalomyelitis, which is which has a better outcome than NMO, and it is highly steroid dependent. We have to rule out MS. The diagnostic criteria for MS includes having a dissemination in space and dissemination in time, which means there should be one or more lesions in two of the following areas, that is juxtacortical, periventricular, infratentorial, and spinal cord. We will be discussing this in detail. Over dissemination in time means there should be two clinical attacks at least 30 days apart, or we should have an enhancing or a non-enhancing lesion in the same MRI, or we can have yeah, new lesions which are enhancing and presence of old lesions which are not enhancing, or other chronic demyelinating disorders such as chronic optic neuropathy or recurrent transverse myelitis. So this should be kept in mind and rule out, and then only we can make a diagnosis of aquaporin antibody negative NMO spectrum disorders. I've already explained the clinical features, just going through again. The brainstem symptoms are again intractable vomiting, diplopia, facial weakness, endocrinopathies because of the diencephalon involvement, SIADH, hypotension, bradycardia. Another thing important to remember about NMO is sometimes they may be associated with other autoimmune disorders like NMD encephalitis, celiac disease, type 1 diabetes, or even thyroiditis. So we might have other systemic features as well. Classical MRI is mostly the brain lesions are surrounding the area which express high aquaporin 4 channels, which are the periventricular areas, areas around the third and the fourth ventricle. The lesions can also involve the supratentorial white matter, midbrain, and cerebellum. Involvement of hypothalamus and area posterior in the MRI is very classical of NMO spectrum disorder. Um, Optic neuritis, usually the lesion involves optic chiasma, and it involves the posterior optic pathway, uh, and it usually involves more than half of the optic nerve length in case of NMO, whereas the lesions in MS are usually anterior. Transverse myelitis will be long segment involving three or more segments of the vertebral column, and the lesion is usually central spinal involvement. Area proxima, we've already seen the posterior medulla involvement. Brainstem, usually periependymal along the fourth ventricle. The lesions can be seen in the brainstem. And diencephalic, this is the around the third ventricle, again periependymal region involving the thalamus and the hypothalamus. Cerebral lesions can be non-specific white matter lesions which do not have a characteristic pattern, but they're not as large and hazy and asymmetrical as seen in edema. So coming to the treatment, acute attack, first line is IV methylprednisolone. If the patient does not improve, plasma exchange and IVIG. Plasma exchange is actually preferred in patients who have long segment of myelitis involvement, severe neurodisability. There are a lot of papers which have explained that plasma exchange, the chances of disability is less. The remaining disability is less, and also the response is earlier, but because of cost and availability, a lot of times IVIG also shows good response. But NMO spectrum disorders are known for severe relapses. Hence, we need something to prevent further relapse and attacks. So, as preventive therapy, along with steroids, we need to put the child on immunosuppressive medications, immunomodulators, azathioprine, rituximab, or mycophenolate mofetil. Azathioprine is a good drug, 2 to 3 milligrams per kg per day. It reduces the relapse rates by 89%. We usually continue it for 18 months to 2 years, but keeping in mind that it takes at least 6 months to come into action. So usually we overlap azathioprine with oral prednisolone for at least 6 months, and then slowly taper oral prednisolone and continue azathioprine for 18 months to 2 years. In very severe cases, if even after plasma exchange they do not respond, even rituximab is used. There are some new therapeutic agents like eculizumab, tocilizumab, accaporumab, and enzymatic aquaporin 4 IgG, D-glycosylation or cleavage enzyme. But I haven't used it or come across. They're still in trial. Coming next to MOG associated encephalomyelitis. So this is I would say it has recently been discovered over the last 5 to 6 years. We have been able to get testing for MOG antibodies. It is different from MS and aquaporin for antibody positive NMO spectrum disorders, but it is more common in pediatric age group. And around 30 to 50% of the patients who present with first episode of acquired demyelinating syndrome are actually MOG positive. So it is actually important to do testing for MOG even in the first case of ADEM, because that determines the prognosis and further treatment of the patient. It involves predominantly IgG antibody, and this MOG protein is actually expressed on the outermost surface, so it is accessible, and mainly causing damage to the oligodendrocytes. The presentation of MOG is, it is seen in patients which are seronegative NMO. Multiphasic ADEM usually are positive for MOG. Some cases of multiple sclerosis, isolated optic neuritis or isolated transverse myelitis, or chronic relapsing inflammatory optic neuropathy. So any case of isolated ADEM, multiphasic ADEM, usually test for MOG antibodies. Difference between aquaporin for positive NMO spectrum disorders and MOG positive NMO spectrum disorders is NMO is actually astropathy, whereas MOG is an oligodendropathy. Astropathy is more severe relapses and usually causes more residual disability, whereas MOG has a good outcome, better prognosis, responds very well to steroids. Usually, NMO affects posterior optic pathway, whereas MOG affects the anterior optic pathway. NMO, as we discussed, is being associated with autoimmune disorders, which is not seen in MOG. As I already mentioned, fewer relapses, better prognosis. The picture of MRI is actually very variable. It can have ADEM-like picture, it can have NMO-like MRI picture. There's no specific MRI image which is very characteristic for MOG. So it has to be tested for all children presenting with acquired demyelinating syndromes. For diagnosis, seropositivity is required. That is the only extra criteria apart from demyelinating presentation. And, yeah, and prognosis is usually good. Most of the cases are monophasic. Some may develop a relapsing disease, and usually the commonest presentation is optic neuritis on relapse, which usually happens on steroid tapering or soon after cessation of steroids. So it is important to actually continue steroids for a little longer time. So if it is a first clinical event and MOG antibody is positive, treatment is same, methylprednisolone not responding, then plasma exchange. As a matter of preventive treatment, if there are good factors like less involvement in the MRI, no residual disability after the acute treatment, we give oral prednisolone, continue it for at least 6 months to a year with close monitoring, and very slowly taper the steroid dose. If there is persistent of MOG antibody positivity or residual disability, then it is the treatment is combined oral prednisolone with azathioprine or MMF. Sometimes even monthly IVIG has been used depending on the severity, or rituximab. So coming for the third case, this is a 8-year-old female child who presented with fever, headache, and no altered sensorium or focal deficit. She had on examination neck stiffness, red eye, submandibular lymph nodes, and X-ray chest was suggestive of pneumonitis. CSF had 300 cells, although they were neutrophil predominant. Protein and sugar was normal. And she was treated outside as TB meningitis, started on 4-drug AKT with steroids. After 6 months, she again had fever for 5 days with dullness. Her appetite was reduced. She developed right upper limb paresis with some difference in speech. With DTRs were +3 and planters were extensors. She had some upper motor neuron signs again this time. So second time when the MRI was done, she had these lesions, which were there was thalamic lesion, hyperintense, a large white matter lesion, midbrain lesion, subcortical lesion, and there was some lesion in the corpus callosum as well. So now with this picture, impression was whether this was a TB vasculitis or the first episode of ADEM. So this was outside. So she was continued on 4 drug of AKT, restarted on steroids in thinking of ADEM, and she completely recovered with steroids in few days. After five months, she again presented with right-sided hemiparesis with the upper motor neuron signs, cells in the CSF5, sugar and protein was normal. The repeat MRI brain showed new lesions, as we can see. Again, there was this juxtacortical lesions. There is some lesions around the corpus callosum and also involving the corpus callosum, and these are ovoid plaque-like lesions. Some are large. Then periventricular lesions. So whether this child is evolving into MS or this is a second episode of ADEM, such as multiphasic ADEM. So this time again, she was treated with IV methylprednisolone and she completely recovered from the acute attack. After 4 months was the fourth episode. This is the time when she actually came to us. She had now inability to sit or stand and walk for last 1 week. She had progressive weakness, more involving the lower limbs than the upper limb, pain in the lower limbs, urinary incontinence. However, the higher functions and speech was normal. So we did a MRI brain with spine this time. So we have again the lesions are more and they are different from the previous scan. We have a whole bunch of the corona radiata area, bilateral periventricular region, white matter hyperintensities along the corpus callosum, which was already there, but it seems to be increased. Then juxtacortical lesion. We have a spinal cord lesion as well now. So CSF oligoclonal bands was positive. NMO antibody was negative. Opthal examination, there was, although she did not have any symptoms of visual loss or any pain in the eye, there was right disc pallor, and VP shows right axonal optic neuropathy. So 4 episodes after 6 to 8 months, new lesions which suggestive of dissemination in space. And since each episode was more than 3 months apart, more than 1 month apart actually, so dissemination in time, and we have new neurological symptoms every time. NMO antibody negative and oligoclonal band positive. Hence, she was diagnosed with pediatric MS. So the McDonald's criteria 2010 for pediatric MS requires two features, which is dissemination in space and dissemination in time. We have a revised criteria 2017, which I will be telling now. But just to understand first, which is 2010 criteria, which is also applicable for 2017. For dissemination in space, we need one lesion involving 2 out of the 4 areas. Juxtacortical is just below the cortical area, periventricle around around the lateral ventricles, infratentorial and spinal cord. Out of these 4 regions, there should be 2 areas involved. And dissemination in time, we should have new T2 or gadolinium enhancing lesion in a follow-up MRI with reference to a baseline scan, or in the same MRI, we should have enhancing and non-enhancing lesion. Actually, the enhancing lesion means that there is activity, it is ongoing, and non-enhancing lesions are old lesions. So this also tells us dissemination time. So according to the updated, the new features which were added in 2017 criteria to speed up the diagnosis and reduce the misdiagnosis was that for dissemination in time, even if we don't have dissemination in time, presence of positive oligoclonal bands in the spinal fluid can be taken as a positive criteria. Both asymptomatic and symptomatic MRI lesions can be considered in determining dissemination in space and time. And even now more and more we are seeing cortical lesions as well, which is involving the gray matter. So the cortical lesions have been added to juxtacortical lesions. So any child who presents these are examples to make us understand when we can make a diagnosis of MS according to the new criteria. Uh, First is simple, fulfilling the criteria of dissemination space and time, either by two attacks and two lesions involving different areas of CNS, or two or more attacks we have where we have dissemination and time, and we have a prior history of a attack which was involving a different location of CNS. So we have dissemination space as well. Any patient presenting with two or more attack, but there is evidence of only one lesion, then we need disseminational space, for which we either need an additional attack involving a different CNS site, or in one MRI scan also if we have two areas involved, it is taken as disseminational space. If a patient presents with a single attack with evidence of two or more lesions, then because it's only one attack, we need extra feature, that is dissemination time, for which either we need another attack, or in the same scan, same single episode, we can have one enhancing and one non-enhancing lesion, which would address to dissemination time. Or if we do not have these two, we should have CSF oligoclonal bands positive. If we have one attack and clinical evidence of one lesion, we should have either another attack or same as two lesions involving two different areas of CNS, with simultaneous presence of either enhancing and non-enhancing lesion, or presence of CSF oligoclonal bands. And this is the criteria for relapsing remitting MS, which is seen in 80 to 90% cases of pediatric MS. Or when some patients who may have primary progressive MS, where there is a disease progression over a 1 year period, for which we require only one lesion in any of these four areas, and two or more spinal cord lesions, and CSF oligoclonal bands, either two of all these three. So, types of MS, which is a chronic demyelinating disorder, usually has a relapsing remitting course in pediatric MS. Some percentage patients can progress from primary to from relapsing remitting type to progressive decline in the neurological disability, which is known as secondary progressive MS. If from the beginning there is no complete improvement in the disability and there is a continuous progression of the disability with new attacks, it is known as primary progressive MS. 2 to 5% of patients have onset below 18 years. Usually, MS is more common in adults. Before 6 years, more common in male. By 12 years, it is more common in female age. So, characteristic MRI features to recognize MS is white matter lesions, which are very specific, ovoid shaped, discrete, well defined, periventricular. They're small dot kind of lesions, mostly in the corona radiata area. Some lesions, very well described, are known as Dawson's finger, which are perpendicular to the ventricles, as was in our case as well. So periventricular lesions aligned perpendicular to the ventricles, known as Dawson's finger. The spinal cord lesions can be a ring-like lesion or a plaque-like, solid plaque-like lesions. Usually they are discontinuous. They may involve a single segment, usually involving less than two or less segments of the spinal cord. Whereas in case of NMO, we had seen that it can be extensive. So, treatment for MS acute phase course, same IV methylprednisolone. Depending on the severity, we have to progress to plasma exchange and IVIG. However, since it is a chronic relapsing disease, it is important to slow the disease activity and prevent long-term disability and thus reducing the relapse frequency. We require disease-modifying agents. So the first line agents are glatiramer acetate and interferon beta. Second line, we have natalizumab, fingolimab, rituximab. I have highlighted these two because these few, as glatiramer acetate and interferon beta, although they are available in India, but they're not used because of cost. Whereas in UK, they're very interferon beta is used commonly. We usually use rituximab, cost effective and more. We don't have any specific guideline for treatment of pediatric MS, but whatever few studies from people who see patients with MS is rituximab has given good results with 50% reduction in the relapse rate. So, rituximab, the dose is 375 milligrams per meter square. It is given either weekly over 4 weeks or two doses in a month, 15 days apart. And then these cycles are repeated every 6 months for 2 years to prevent relapse. So our child was treated in the acute phase with plasma exchange 10 cycles. After 2 cycles, she was able to sit with support and started bearing some weight. After 5 cycles, she was able to walk few steps with support, and she started walking independently after 10 cycles of plasma exchange. This was followed by rituximab to prevent a relapse as maintenance therapy, 375 milligrams per meter square. If 15 days is two doses, that is one cycle. And these cycles are repeated at 6 monthly interval over 2 years. She did not have any further relapse over 2 years, and I don't know what happened to her after 2 years, because this was at the time of my fellowship, so I don't know her follow-up, but she was doing really well. Sometimes we may have to give rituximab earlier, depending on the CD19 and 20 counts. We monitor that for the next dose of rituximab. So, to summarize, basically how to differentiate between ADEM, NMO, and MS. These are the clinical characteristics which we've already gone through. Just to highlight age group, ADEM usually less than 10 years, NMO 20 to 40 years, MS beyond 10 years. Now we do see NMOs as well now in children. Uh, Antibody negative, usually MOG positive, around adolescent age group, more common in females. Encephalopathy is a characteristic feature of ADEM. Uh, then MRI characteristic, ADEM large confluent lesions, NMO periventricular along the third, fourth ventricles, hypothalamic area prostrema, MS Dawson's finger, juxtacortical periventricular lesions, CSF pleocytosis in ADEM, aquaporin antibody positive in NMO, oligoclonal band is positive in MS. MRI, spine involvement in ADEM is rare, but it can happen. NMO, more large segment lesions, mostly cervicothoracic involvement, whereas in MOG, we have the lesions can extend up to the caudal region. In MS, usually it is patchy focal lesions less than two segments and peripherally located. It's just a diagrammatic representation to remember the lesions in MS, which are plaque-like, whereas along the ventricular region, ADEM, MOG can actually, important thing to remember about MOG is it can also have a cortical involvement with meningeal involvement. So sometimes a child where we are thinking of this is some infective etiology like encephalitis, fever, seizure, encephalopathy, and the scan shows a lesion involving the gray matter and the meninges, but the child does not respond to the usual treatment and the course which we follow for encephalitis, we should also think of MOG antibody and send for MOG, and they respond beautifully to steroids. NMO, optic chiasma and the posterior involvement, MS and MOG, anterior involvement of the optic nerve. Spinal regions are usually central in NMO, whereas they are peripheral in MS. MOG can have a dilatation of the central spinal cord. Uh, yeah. So, so demyelinating disorders are not rare. They should always be thought in children presenting with acute infective presentation. A precise and a detailed description of clinical picture along with MRI, CSF studies allow the type of characterization of the different acquired demyelinating syndrome. And it is important to recognize the specific demyelinating disorder to explain, to determine the treatment and to explain the prognosis to the parents, and to, to make a plan of how we will be giving the maintenance therapy to the child. Thank you.
Thank you so much,
Thank
Dr.
you
P.
very much, Arpita. Can
Yes.
I entered your lecture 15, like 20 minutes down the line. And
Yes.
Tarishi, I'm extremely impressed by your presentation, by the work you are doing, and the way you presented. So,
Thank you so much, ma'am.
congratulations for your progress. What I would like to say is it's a very important thing you said, that we have to keep such lesions in our mind, and we are making more of such diagnosis with improved diagnostic facilities. Since you left, you know what was here. Things
Yes, ma'am.
have become better, in the sense more diagnostic facilities have been added to our armamentarium. Plasma pheresis is happening, although we are not
Oh, wow.
using it. But what
Mm.
I would like to say is that what is equally important for all of us in this talk to understand is that besides doing research in clinical practice, it is very important to follow protocols and to document and follow up your patients, because that would be adding a wealth of knowledge when we manage patients. That would give us our India specific protocols and
Correct.
our own experiences. So over to Dr. Arpita. Over to Arpita. Thank you, Tarishi, once more.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you so much, ma'am. And thank you, Dr. Tarishi Nimani, for such an interesting approach towards a very complex pediatric demyelinating disorder. We are indeed wiser after hearing your great talk. And now we know the importance of doing spine, screen, and optic cuts while evaluating such patients. Now I would request the audience if they have any queries. Dr. Tarishi will be happy to answer and solve them. You can unmute yourself or just write in the chat box. So if there are no queries, Dr. Tarishi,
Ma'am,
you would like to...
I would like to have a
Okay,
question.
yeah, go
Hi,
ahead.
Tanishi. It was a wonderful presentation.
Thanks,
I just
Alicia.
have one question that in simple first episode of Adam, do you prescribe the maintenance steroids for 6 months in every child after giving IV methylprednisolone?
No, we give it for 4 to 6 weeks, but I would do MOG antibody even in the first episode
No.
of it.
Yeah,
It is
this is my question. Do you give this 4 to 6 weeks to every child?
four to
Because
six weeks.
we stop at 5 days of IV methylprednisolone if the child is completely recovered.
No, IV methylprednisolone is for 5 days, followed by oral steroids over 4 to 6 weeks. It is a very low dose, 2 weeks of 2 milligrams per kg per day, and then slowly taper over 4 to 6 weeks. Next 2 weeks, basically.
Okay.
Yes, I give it to every child.
Okay. Thank you. And one more question. What is your protocol for the plasma exchange in MS patients?
So it is not different for NMO or MS. It is basically done by our pediatric hemat and nephro team, and basically we do 3 to 5 cycles, depend over a period of 7 to 10 days, depending upon the response. If the child responds in 3 cycles, we stop at that. Usually prefer giving if there is a plan of giving IVIG, it should be given after giving plasma exchange. But yeah, and the plasma exchange usually we give when we have a long segment spinal involvement or quadriparesis, severe disability. So 3 to 5 cycles. In some cases, like this, our child with MS, she was not responding, so
Yes.
it was extended up to 10 cycles. But usually, NMO and MS 3 to 5 cycles, and then we
Oh,
switch to rituximab if it is not responding.
okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah, hi Tadishi, this is
Hi,
Nishant.
sir.
Hi, good talk. I also have a query. We had a patient with NMO admitted last week itself, and he came from Delhi and was already treated with pulse methylprednisolone there. So, how do you define recovery in NMO? Because we don't know whether the disease, because his paraparesis has not returned, his optic neuritis has improved, okay, but his power in the lower limbs are static for last 1 month. He had already received his pulse steroid IVIG, and we gave him 4 doses of rituximab. So rituximab and immunomodulators are basically to prevent relapses and recurrence. But what
Correct,
about the
correct.
acute episode? So how do you know whether this is going to last forever or is it going to recover the
So
weakness?
usually NMO, if there is a long spinal lesion, we usually are left with paraparesis and disability. But while they are admitted, not 1 month later, obviously this has become a chronic thing, and now even if you treat acutely, it's not going to help. But during that time, if we would, in place of IVIG after methylprednisolone, if they would have done plasma exchange I would have expected a better recovery in the degree of paraplesis. I cannot define that which patient will completely recover or how much disability they will be left with, but it usually depends upon the spinal lesion which is there. And during treatment, we see over the as we are giving IV methylprednisolone, okay, the vision is slightly improving or not, and the disability, the power, if it was 0, has it come to 2 at least, and then the cost also comes into picture after IVIG or plasma exchange that we've done 3 cycles and they're not able to afford. Then we switch to then maintenance therapy.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
So, Tarishi, my request, anybody else? Sorry, Arpita, somebody else is asking, please, the mask.
Ma'am, just one more question, Tarishi. If in the same case, after giving rituximab, the patient did not show good recovery, so should we add azathioprine or just keep him on oral steroids only?
No, so we treat either with azathioprine, with
Or
steroids,
rituximab.
or rituximab. When you're giving rituximab, now you're giving it for the relapse, not for the recovery of this episode. So this disability has already happened. You will do physiotherapy and supportive if bladder is involvement, intermittent catheterization to help them with that. Basically, we scan them every 3 to 6 months. First time after 3 months, and if there is no clinical relapse, then in 6 months to see if there is any new lesion. And if you're treating with rituximab, I would do CD19 and 20 at 6 months, or maybe 4 to 5 months, depending how the child is, if he had more than 1 or 2 relapses in a year. So if the levels, we have to maintain levels 0. So if the levels are 1 or more, then I would give a repeat dose instead of waiting for 6 months a little earlier of rituximab.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So, can I say something now, if
Yes, ma'am.
Arpita?
Yes,
So,
ma'am. Yes.
Tarishi, I am taking this opportunity of exploring the idea of having an expert panel of specialists who are our alumni besides the lecture. So, for example, if we have a case like this, which Nishant and Dr. Arisha were discussing, or something else, then on a on a fixed time, on at convenience of our alumni experts, can we take your advice?
Definitely, ma'am. There is like always open. You don't have to fix a
For
time.
sure. So I would request, what's her name, Arpita,
Yes,
we
ma'am.
begin with you, that we would have you as a pediatric neurologist expert on our alumni expert. And as and when cases come, then we would link you with the faculty who would want to discuss through Dr. Arpita. And then at a convenient time, we would be wiser, because see, the exposure, the knowledge which people have when they've gone out, it's different. And it's always good to have a set of people whom we can discuss and talk with. So what do my faculty think? Do you think you are open with it, and what do
I think
others
it's a
think?
great idea, ma'am. I think it's a great idea.
Ma'am, very good idea.
So we begin with Tarishi, and it is bilateral. So if you
Yes, ma'am.
think we are
Definitely. I
of
mean,
any help
it
to
would be a
you,
learning opportunity for me also.
yes, it's bilateral. So anything, you can approach any one of us anytime. And of course, you have all our numbers you've just left.
Okay.
But if you don't, then we can route it through Arpita, who's then our nodal point here. And we will continue with this and keep adding specialty experts to our alumni expert panel, so that we all are better, our residents are better, and we can also get guidance on research topic. We just make a humble beginning and see how it goes on. I mean, the potentials are huge, but let's make a beginning. Nishant has unmuted himself. Do you want to say something, Nishant?
No, ma'am.
Okay.
It's a good idea.
Yeah. It's, see, you see, we are not managing the way you told us you are managing. I mean, I'm being honest. Maybe I'm naive, but we're not doing the CD counts while we're managing our protocols. So, like you have protocols, we should have standardized protocols for NMO, standardized protocols for ADAM, repeat ADAM. And we will be really helped with this initiative. It's a
Sure.
small beginning, but we can make a start.
Definitely. Sure, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you.
Arpita?
Thank you so much. Yes,
Okay,
ma'am.
over to you.
Yes. Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you once again, Dr. Tarishi, for such an excellent talk, and we'll look forward to have more such sessions with you, and we'll be taking your help in solving difficult cases, as ma'am suggested. I think it's a great idea. So
Thank
we'll be
you.
needing your time in future.
Sure. Thank you so much. It's actually an honor for me.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And you're welcome to the department when you come to Lucknow.
Yeah, it's a home.
Definitely,
You can
ma'am.
come in.
Okay, bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.